Greetings citizens of the world. A mind-bending new Security Council (SC) report circulating in the Kremlin today says that President Donald Trump is turning the tables, turning a position of disadvantage into one of advantage, on his leftist Socialist Democratic Party enemies by his preparing to criminally charge them with colluding with Russia should they regain power in the upcoming 2018 midterm elections. A scheme began by Trump, on 24th of July, when he suddenly declared, "I'm very concerned that Russia will be fighting very hard to have an impact on the upcoming election. Based on the fact that no president has been tougher on Russia than me, they will be pushing very hard for the Democrats. They definitely don't want Trump." His following that declaration up a little more than a week later, on 2nd of August, by having all of his top security and intelligence officials solemnly warning that the Russian threat to interfere in the 2018 midterm elections is real and, just hours ago, was supported by evidence provided by one of the world's largest tech giants, Microsoft, who claimed that the same Russian military hackers who attacked Hillary Clinton to defeat her 2016 presidential bid, are now attacking Trump's Republican Party to, likewise, ensure their 2018 election defeat too. According to this report, one of the most enduring mysteries confronting the Kremlin, since President Trump achieved his stunning 2016 election victory over Hillary Clinton, has been why Trump has allowed the entirely made-up Russian collusion fairy tale to fester in the American body politic, but that became clearer to understand after a 18th of July poll was released in the U.S. showing that this comical Russian collusion meme had reached its peak saturation point, with fully 60% of the American people believing the lie that Russia had interfered in the 2016 presidential election, broken down by it being believed by 85% of the Democrats, 53% of independents, and 46% of Republicans. While 60% of the American people believe this Russian collusion lie, however, this report notes, a 20th of July poll showed that they couldn't care less about it, with less than 1% of them saying it was something that they were concerned about. Likened to a burglar entering into a home and stealing all of its precious belongings, but whose owners couldn't care less that this happened. These two July 2018 polls showing that while 60% of the American people accept the fact that Russia had interfered in their 2016 presidential election, but a statistically insignificant less than 1% of them even care about it, this report explains, points conclusively to the fact that the United States is in the manic grip of the psychological state known as cognitive dissonance, that is the mental discomfort, psychological stress, experienced by a person who simultaneously holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values, with this discomfort being triggered by a situation in which a belief of a person clashes with new evidence perceived by that person, and when confronted with facts that contradict personal beliefs, ideals, and values, sees those afflicted trying to find a way to resolve the contradiction in order to reduce their discomfort, and that, on 26th of July, President Trump began provided the antidote for by his declaring that Russia was colluding with Democrats. As to what forced the masses of these American people into a state of cognitive dissonance, that President Trump is now exploiting to his own advantage, this report details, was their own deep state-aligned and Democrat Party-controlled mainstream propaganda media, who not only guaranteed that Trump wouldn't win the presidency, they further proclaimed that the U.S. was on the brink of a liberal renaissance that Hillary Clinton's victory would usher in. In what was the deep states and Democratic Party's most ill-fated move to ensure that Trump would never win the U.S. presidency, though, this report notes, was their conspiring together to create the Russian collusion fairy tale, while at the same time illegally clearing Hillary Clinton of her crimes, and when it failed to work, saw them then using it to undermine the Trump's presidency. But with their failing to take into consideration that the majority of the American people were no longer accepting the facts being spoon-fed into them by the mainstream propaganda media. If the deep state, Hillary Clinton, Democratic Party and U.S. mainstream propaganda media would have simply accepted then President-elect Trump's olive branch he extended to them during a nationwide interview, just days after his election, wherein he said that Hillary Clinton did some bad things, but that ultimately the Clintons are good people, this report continues, The current Russian collusion cognitive dissonance mania griping the United States could have been averted, most particularly because no evidence that Trump ever colluded with Russia exists, and that stands opposed to the massive and overwhelming evidence that Hillary Clinton and her husband Bill Clinton have been openly colluding with Russia for decades. From Hillary Clinton receiving over $145 million in a secret deal that allowed Russia to take control of over 20% of the United States' uranium reserves, to Bill Clinton meeting with President Putin and giving a 30-minute speech in Russia for which he was paid $500,000, to both of them being the masterminds of the greatest scandal in American history known as Chinagate, this report says, the failure of these malign parties to accept Trump's olive branch has unleashed upon the entire American nation a virtual fire hose of facts such as these that has subsumed the mainstream propaganda media's ability to stop, and that finds them all now just ignoring the truth rather than reporting it, thus leaving their readers and viewers with nothing left to cling to but Russia hysteria. Along with tens of millions of Americans being forced into cognitive dissonance due to Trump winning an election that they were told it was impossible for him to do, and his being accused of colluding with Russia, but that they are now all discovering only Hillary Clinton and her deep state backers had done, this report further details, the U.S. mainstream propaganda media, nevertheless, decided to compound this mania with apocalyptic headlines before the 2016 presidential election such as a President Trump could destroy the world economy with further grave pronouncements of what would happen if Trump won being Eric Zitzwitz, former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund declaring, if Trump wins we should expect a big markdown in expected future earnings for a wide range of stocks, and a likely crash in the broader market if Trump becomes president. Larry Summers, former Clinton and Obama chief economist declaring, under Trump, I would expect a protracted recession to begin within 18 months. The damage would be felt far beyond the United States. Simon Johnson, MIT economics professor, in the New York Times declaring, Trump would likely cause the stock market to crash and plunge the world into recession. Steve Ratner, MSNBC economics guru and former Obamacare czar declaring, if Trump wins you will see a market crash of historic proportions. Ben White, chief economic writer for Politico declaring, Wall Street is set up for a major crash if Donald Trump shocks the world on Election Day and wins the White House. And Paul Krugman, Nobel Prize economics winner and New York Times writer declaring that America as we know it is in mortal danger. The American people are looking at a global recession, with no end in sight, and is vowing that even if President Trump declared himself a dictator, America will never reach 3% growth. With these tens of millions of Americans already being put into a state of cognitive dissonance because of Trump winning, and they're further discovering that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party colluded with Russia instead of Trump, this report says, one can only imagine the outer boundaries of near insanity they've been pushed to by their mainstream propaganda media establishment, with the evidence now showing that, since the day Trump was elected president in November of 2016, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has risen by some 35%, making the last 17 months one of the greatest bull market runs in history, that has seen some $6 trillion of wealth has been created for Americans, which is very good news for the 55 million Americans with 401k plans, the 25 million or so who have IRAs, and another 20 million with company pension plans and employee stock ownership plans. Without even having to declare himself a dictator, too, this report further notes, President Trump has exploded U.S. economic growth to 4.1% in an American economic expansion not seen since 2005, and that shows no evidence of its being able to be stopped, and that's carrying in its wake tens of millions of once jobless Americans whose employment in high-paying jobs has now reached record proportions, thus leaving the United States in the unheard-of position of having more jobs than workers to fill them. And Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman's New York Times, in a rare nod to reality, to acknowledge their predictive failure and print the headline, "We ran out of words to describe how good the jobs numbers are." With President Trump now taking full control of his nation's cognitive dissonance-affected citizens, this report concludes, He now finds himself in an impossible-to-lose situation against his deep state enemies as it regards the 2018 midterm elections, that if Trump's Republican Party wins, will see his continuing to dismantle the deep state, but if losing, would find him accusing the Democrats of criminally conspiring with Russia to rig it in their favor, and that the majority of the American people have already been predisposed to believe is true, and to which Russia, of course, would contritely admit to promising to never to do it again, and who will give to Trump all of the evidence he needs to prosecute these traitorous Democrats, and in exchange for doing so would receive from Trump the dropping of Russian sanctions, thus spelling the demise of the deep state who, right after the 2016 election, failed to heed the words of Microsoft founder billionaire Bill Gates, who warned them all that not only is Trump very sophisticated, he could only be compared President John F. Kennedy, who was one of the last U.S. presidents to go to war against deep state by seeking peace with Russia, but in whose catastrophic failure provided the roadmap that Trump's now using to keep himself alive. Note: it was no coincidence that President Trump became the first U.S. president in history to see the entire files on the President John F. Kennedy assassination, with his keeping the most important of them private only to himself.